Hello, creative people. Thanks for tuning into Melody or Witchcraft. I'm your host, Kathryn Petruccelli. On the podcast, we hear a poet read a work of their own and an Emily Dickinson poem of their choosing that contributed to their work. We discuss poetry, Dickinson, the fluidity of time, and the scope and sources of creative inspiration. The past is such a curious creature, Dickinson wrote. Join us to find out how it can teach us about our now.
The soul selects her own society, then shuts the door. To her divine majority, present no more. Unmoved, she notes the chariots pausing at her low gate. Unmoved, an emperor be kneeling upon her mat. I've known her from an ample nation choose one, then close the valves of her attention like stone.
That was Dr. Evie Shockley reading Emily Dickinson. Poet and scholar Evie Shockley thinks, creates, and writes with her eye on a Black feminist horizon. Her books of poetry include Suddenly We, NAACP Image Award, National Book Award finalist, Semi-Automatic, Hurston Wright Legacy Award, Pulitzer Prize finalist, and The New Black, Hurston Wright Legacy Award. Her literary criticism includes renegade poetics, Black aesthetics, and formal innovation in African American poetry, and numerous essays. Most recently, she is editor of the Norton Library edition of Harriet Jacobs' Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. Shockley is the Zora Neale Hurston Distinguished Professor of English at Rutgers University. Hello and welcome, Evie. Thank you for talking to me.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be in conversation with you.
Tell me about this poem for you, this choice.
This poem is really one of about 10 that I was struggling to choose among, but it really holds a special place in my heart. I think it's one that I read early in my acquaintance with Dickinson back when I was in college. And it's one that has always spoken to my sense of self, I guess. You can be forced to do a lot of things in this world to get by or conform or fit in, but your interior self is inviolate, and you can choose who you really respect and who you really love and who you really want to be around without, some of the pretense that it takes to keep things moving smoothly.
I love that, to keep things moving smoothly, like in our everyday.
In our everyday.
Yeah.
Bosses that don't understand, people that disagree about things that seem to be fundamental truths. You might have to concede not your point, but the argument in order to keep employed, live with your neighbors, whatever it may be. But this poem is reaffirming that what you believe inside, nobody can change that. Mm-hmm. Nobody can change that. And in some ways, this poem is about kind of the inner circle, the closest circle of one's regard. Emily Dickinson, in this poem, really just sort of shows her spine, if you will, her mettle. It was for all of these reasons that I chose to write about this poem in an essay I did about Dickinson's influences on contemporary poets. One who doesn't seem as contemporary now, of course, because she's passed on, but Gwendolyn Brooks. I was imagining her. We know from her own accounts that she read Dickinson and didn't like her at first, but then grew to appreciate her. But we don't know which poems she focused on. And so I had the chance to kind of imagine what a poem that might have appealed to Brooks in order to write about that relationship in the essay. And I gravitated immediately towards this one.
Yeah.
It resonated with what I saw as Brooks's own spine when she walked away from Harper and Row to move
big.
into, to give up that kind of platform, you
The
might say,
security, I guess.
distribution. Yeah, absolutely. And a relationship with an editor that the editor herself, she really was friends with
Mm.
after a certain period and really appreciated. You know, she did what she felt she needed to do. And when she had the chance to visit Dickinson's homestead at some point after that decision, she included a picture of herself there
Oh, I love
in
this
her.
line in your. I
Yeah,
love this quote. Go ahead. I have
yeah,
it marked
yeah.
up
No,
all over the place in your essay.
I don't have it like right in front of me,
Oh,
but
I can read
it's
it to
something
you.
like, please, please, please do, because her words are better than anything I could
Yes.
paraphrase.
So just to complete for folks the leaving Harper Row, she leaves that publisher to go with an upstart black owned small press, correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Dudley Randall's Broadside Press, which was operating out of Detroit. And yeah, upstart, I think, is a good way of putting it. And also, you know, sort of very countercultural. He was publishing Sonia Sanchez. Audre Lorde's first book was published there.
Mm.
He really gave a different platform to the poets who were writing such sort of, I think, revolutionary aesthetically and revolutionary in their political imaginings.
Mm-hmm.
These poets who mainstream publishers would not have wanted to publish at that in that initial stage. And Brooks's leaving Harper and Row for Broadside meant that more people would come to those younger poets because she was already 50, I think, when she made her recommitment to that Black arts movement kind of thinking. And so it was huge for her, but it was huge. It meant something for a lot more people than just her.
Yeah, for a legacy, I guess, which fits into the themes here on the podcast in terms of literary ancestors. And
Absolutely.
here's that quote.
Yay.
So the article, Coloring Dickinson, Race Influence and Lyric Disreading. And you say the caption that she, meaning Brooks, provides for this image of herself is, I think Emily, after the first shock at my intrusion, would have approved of my natural.
Yes, because she had just cut her hair, got all the perm off. She was, you know, sporting her short natural, and the picture of her is just so delightful. You know, she's got a strong look on her face, and she's there to commune with a poet that I think she cared about it.
Mm.
Obviously,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
yeah. Hmm.
So, at the risk of zeroing in a little bit too much to the academic classroom, I wanted you to kind of set the scene in terms of who you are when Dickinson enters your life and what is your initial reaction to Dickinson. I just say that about the academic classroom because being aware that I'm talking mostly to professors, to folks that are teaching, but not wanting to exclude the audience that doesn't have that experience. So,
Right.
and always thinking about what that means if our literature is presented primarily in that setting, what that means for us as a culture. But anyway, that's a lot of tangential stuff for you to ruminate on.
No, it's really helpful to be reminded of that aspect of your audience. I write a lot of different kinds of poems, hoping that there is something for everyone in my books, and so I'm also really attuned to audience and interested in audience. But what I would say is, you know, I probably first read Dickinson in high school, which is still an academic setting, but it means that she's, you know, so important to our tradition, or has been constructed as being that important to our tradition, that you get her even if you're not sort of academic in the sense of going on to higher education. So I think like everybody kind of knows about Dickinson, even if what they know is the myths or the TV show or, you know, whatever it might be.
Sure.
So in that sense, hopefully this will speak to everybody. I did probably read her in high school, but what I really remember is having the anthology of her, well, the collection of her work, First Harvest or something like that. It's a selection, and it's
Yes.
pre some of the restoration of her full typographical excess, but I still have this copy, and I highlighted in pink the numbers of all the poems that we were assigned to read and that I read. And so I can still go back and verify I read this when I was in college. And that's, these are the poems of Dickinson's that I've had the longest relationship with. And so I don't know if I remember really what I thought about her poetry at that time, but I do think that it always stuck with me that her poetry was something that other poets that I was learning about could be sort of compared to in a variety of ways. In one sense, she's super traditional. She's got these, hymn meter quatrains, ABAB rhyme or ABCB rhyme, super conventional in one sense. And in the other sense, she's like the foremother, if you will, to a lot of experimental poetry because she's so weird and her images are like really bizarre and hard to pin down, and you
Mm-hmm.
never know exactly what a poem is about. And that seems to have given license to a lot of people like myself who are interested in pushing language in new directions rather than or in addition to mastery, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
of traditional forms. So she shows up everywhere. She shows up in Susan Howe. She shows up in Brooks. She's just kind of omnipresent. And so my relationship to her has been a kind of ongoing aesthetic conversation. When I try to write in her mode, it comes out really, really close, like derivative, as I think we will hear later. But I'm still drawn to the sound and the kind of the impact of her poems and wish that I could do something like that that would sound more like my voice and yet somehow like marry all of those things. The rhyme, the slant rhyme, the weird imagery that somehow conveys so much emotion and
Mm-hmm.
sensation at the same time.
Kind of a visceral quality. Yeah.
Totally, totally. But I think, in effect, in terms of the poetry that I think of as most central to my work, I think her influence is felt more in my interest in wordplay and weirdness, sonic resonance. I like my poems to resound line by line, whether it's end rhymes or not. And so I think she's given me a lot of models for how to make sound that's powerful or explosive, sometimes even, and surprising.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
Would you talk a little bit about the lyric disreading, as you name it, in your article? Because I think, yeah, there's so much we can talk about in terms of the larger context around her in her time and what she said and didn't say.
Yeah. I mean, the article is trying to navigate the fact that on one hand, not a lot of people talk about the influence that Dickinson has, or I'll say it like this, the way 20th and 21st century poets of color have drawn upon her work. I wanted to sort of bring attention to that absence in the scholarship, not total absence, but a sort of a underrepresented thread of potential scholarship. But I wanted to do so without sort of making Dickinson like this figure to which these later poets are subordinate. I wanted to think about influence in a way that allowed the later poets their own agency because Dickinson was so either bad or silent or both on matters of race, both with regard to Blackness, Black people. Slavery was, obviously fiercely in effect at the time that she was writing, and her brother and father were engaged in political conversations about abolition and the possibility of that. all the time, and it just doesn't show up a lot in her work. The Civil War was going on during part of the time she was writing, and it just doesn't much show up in her work. She also has a lot of kind of Orientalist references. And so I thought I could take a couple of poets, well, Toy Derricott, Gwendolyn Brooks, and Marilyn Chin, and think about how they gesture to Dickinson in their writing, how her model shows up in their work, but revealing them to be not ignoring the way race shows up or doesn't show up in her poems, but navigating it, like invoking it, exposing it, bringing it to the surface, and still finding ways to read some of her poems that are not about race in ways that are affirming for some of the kinds of things that they might be going through. So with the Brooks example, there's this model that she can take from Dickinson, both in terms of slant rhyme, which proved to be really important for Brooks's work, especially her sonnet series, Gay Chaps in the Bar, from her very first book, but also important for her in this decision that she's making later on to, to make a move.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so disidentification is a term that Jose Munoz developed in order to talk about ways that queer of color folks could relate to and take as models people who could not serve as like 100% identifications. And I took his term disidentifications and sort of portmanteaued it with lyric reading and came up with the phrase lyric disreading. And I'm less attached to the phrase than I am to the idea.
Sure.
The idea that we read poems, and sometimes because of the tradition that we've been handed, poets of color have to or choose to read those poems in ways that were probably not what the author intended, in order to create space for ourselves in that tradition and for our work to flourish.
Right. I want to give listeners just a little bit more context, and then I have so many questions. so, so slavery would have been abolished in Massachusetts in the 1780s. Dickinson comes on the scene in 1830. Nonetheless, obviously, this is, as you said, hugely part of the landscape still. As we know, the Civil War in the middle of Dickinson's lifetime. But also, you mentioned her father and her brother. I mean, Edward Dickinson, her father, served one term in the U.S. Congress, did not serve another for a variety of reasons, of course, we can imagine, one of which is he was so married to his extremely conservative ideas and interpretations of the Constitution and did not join Lincoln's Republican Party. I used to say to people on the tour that he was anti-slavery but was not an abolitionist because he had absolutely no interest in decentering whiteness. In fact, financially, he and many, many of the provincial elite, as they were called in Amherst at the time, were, for example, earning income through the Amherst cotton factory that was bringing in cotton from the southern states from enslaved hands at that time. We could talk about this a long time. So
it's deeply embedded. Yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, there is a website of the Black history of Amherst, and I will link that in the show notes as well. And around Dickinson in other ways, not just sort of the men talking blah blah in the parlor about politics, but her friend Helen Hunt Jackson from Amherst, a writer who published for money.
God forbid.
God forbid in her lifetime. What? So Helen wrote a book, for example, called A Century of Dishonor, about the U.S. government relationship with Native Americans, that she purchased a copy at her own expense for every member of Congress, and followed that a few years later. So that was 1881. Followed that a few years later with the novel Ramona, which is a Native American our mixed race central character.
Heroine. Yeah.
Right. Trying to appeal, as I think she said, to people's hearts. So she was doing what she could, and this was someone that was a close correspondent, a close friend with Dickinson, and Dickinson is still quite silent on
Silent.
these matters,
Hmm.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Lots of selectiveness besides the soul. Yeah. That's how I
Good
see it.
one.
I definitely selective in so many ways, and yeah, on so many
Selective in
topics.
so many ways. That's so well put. I mean, yeah, I mean, we've inherited in some ways up until just really recently, very, very 21st century, this idea that politics and poetics should be separate realms, that poems should be about the eternal truths, blah, blah, blah. And I think it's Brooks and the Black Arts Movement poets, Baraka and Sanchez and Giovanni and so forth, and the Beats, Ginsberg and that crew. These were some of the poets who started to break down that very solidified idea about aesthetics and its relationship to current events or even historical events that have a political cast. And I'm really, really grateful to them because what it has meant for us in the 21st century, poets of color, queer poets, trans poets, women poets, all of us have inherited a landscape in which the definition of what poetry is, while still debated, contested, is just much more expansive in terms of possibilities for what one can take up than Dickinson might have felt. I just don't know. I don't think we know whether she forced herself to be silent, whether her opinions would have been ones that I would have wanted to hear.
Mm-hmm.
There's just a lot we don't know, but she was clearly making choices not to write about something as huge as the Civil War. And that's what we do know.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
selective indeed.
Now I no longer remember if I drew this from your article or another, but this idea of kind of placing on activist, political minded work something other than lyric. Lyric would have been, right, what they were calling sort of the white writers' goings on about the world. And that anything that was brought in, I'm thinking of Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. Did I get all the names? Contemporary
Mm-hmm.
of Dickinson,
Mm-hmm.
born to free black parents in 1825, writing and writing and writing about the black experience.
About slavery, which she didn't know firsthand, but
Mm-hmm.
still felt compelled to write against.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And that she would have been sort of parsed away from this description of lyric.
Yes. I mean, I don't know if that's something I talk about in this essay, although it's certainly an idea that I've engaged with. I think Virginia Jackson's book, it's Dickinson's Misery. Is that the title? I think
I don't know that one.
she has done a lot to start a conversation about what the lyric is.
Mm,
And I think some of the responses to her work have taken up the way race plays into that definition of lyric in just the ways that you were speaking about.
mm.
So I won't take credit for that
Okay,
idea,
it's
but
possible that I got it from Emily Dickinson's Black Contexts, which is Bridget Fielder, and that one comes
okay.
from the Oxford
Hmm.
Handbook of Emily Dickinson, which is a big,
Love it.
fat hardcover that costs a lot of money. So hopefully your library has it.
Libraries are our wealth.
I do not own. Yeah, and the other thing that I was thinking of when you were speaking earlier was this idea when you're addressing Marilyn Chin's work in your writing, the possibility, and this is kind of me extrapolating a little bit here from what was said in the article, but Dickinson's obsession with the hereafter,
Mhm.
eternity, and that this is something of maybe an opportunity for 21st century writers to be that hereafter, the one that's
Oh,
here.
lovely. Yeah.
that kind of the new paradigms around efforts for equality would be the future, would be that eternity that she was so fixated on.
Oh, that's so interesting. I mean, already with the Brooks, the quote that you read, there's this sort of crash collision of the past and the present where she imagines Dickinson, who, was living in a very different time, being shocked at having a Black guest in her home, but also approving of her natural, which is very much a 20th century phenomenon for Brooks anyway. And so I talked about that, but it's interesting to think about eternity in Dickinson having its fruition in the here and now, in the on earth, let's just say, on this
Mm-hmm.
plane among the living, as opposed to with death, which is, in some ways a recurring subject for her. I like the idea that, I mean, Chen picks up on Dickinson in the book that I write about in the essay because she's grieving. So Dickinson's eternity, which seems oddly full of life in a lot of different kinds of ways, very sensual, very peopled, often, very much about how death would feel to the body and all these different kinds of things. I think Chin is interested in all that multiplicity. She's also interested in Dickens' quatrains, and and those ideas and forms come together for her in some really powerful ways. I pulled up the article while we were talking, and I want to read the quatrain that Chin wrote about Emily in her
Please.
poem, Dueling the Quatrains, or From the Notebook of an Ex-Revolutionary. And the Emily quatrain reads, Eternity suits you, Emily. New rouge on your cheeks. Entertainment today wants to interview you. How Mr. So and so Higginson spurned your love. How Mr. So and so Johnson mended your bones. She's she's
Yes,
got such
yes.
a cheeky and quirky and very lively language that sort of comes after Dickinson in the sense that she's really interested in her quatrains, but also takes Dickinson in some new directions. Entertainment Today wants to interview you.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. And Higginson, of course, her correspondent and editor, Thomas Wentworth Higginson, and Johnson
Yeah.
referring to Thomas Johnson, who created the first collected works in 1955, just to fill in those things.
No, I love that your past as a docent at the homestead gives you just this whole wealth of information that you can just pull up at the drop of a dime. It's
Ish.
really neat.
Let me invite you to read, if you would, the poem that you brought. And this maybe will piggyback a bit on Marilyn Chin's grieving, on that focus on death, and the idea of
Yeah.
eternity that shows up in so much of Dickinson's work and shows up in your poems. So feel free to introduce it or just read, and we can talk later as you like.
Okay. I will just, remind listeners that, as I said earlier, this is a poem that is in my, I guess you could say, my Dickinson voice. In other words, I'm really writing in her mode, which is just something I enjoy trying. I've got two or three poems like this, where I'm either writing about her or sometimes writing in her bedroom, which is a thing that poets sometimes get to do if we're lucky. Anyway, it was written very recently. It's not published. It's subject to revision. But when I felt the move to write about, I guess you could say, a changing relationship to death as I get older, Dickinson was who I thought of as the way in. Like her poems, it's officially untitled. Proximity to death, when recognized, shellac steel upon the skin, set cement behind the eyes. Even at a distance, if looking death's way, dark thunder stuns the ear and drowns out day. Mortality of beloveds upends a brimming heart. but the end of self contemplated stills the brain in its path, as if Medusa loosed her hair and the mind's eye gazed upon what cannot be, but is, without shield of even gauze.
Thank you. Yeah. What I'm hearing in the poem, we start out that first stanza with all of those sibilants, all of those proximity, recognize, shellacs, steel skin, sets eyes. And we end there
Yeah.
as if Medusa loosed her hair and the mind's beautiful.
Thank
In
you.
that last stanza, too, the gazed and the gauze, gazed gauze, and the mind's eye gazed upon what cannot be but is, without shield even of gauze. And that is our turn. Our turn is from looking at death in the beloved to looking at death
Yeah.
in ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Just such a you know, we all talk about this, that we go through these stages where all our friends are getting married, all our friends are having kids, all our friends are suddenly
Mm-hmm.
dying,
Mm-hmm.
or getting ill.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one thing to see it happening to your parents. When they start talking about all their friends that are dying, you're just like, why are you always, I literally said to my mother, probably 10, 15 years ago, even, why are you always talking about people dying? Like, is there not other stuff going on that we could to talk about? But this is her whole peer group, her generational cohort. And now I'm at the point where well past 50, I see it and feel it. And I hadn't written about that very much. And so this poem was a stab at thinking through the way illness and people actually passing changes the way you think about life, the way you feel in your body. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I really appreciate your attention to the sound. It's like I realized at a certain point that the first couple of stanzas were, one is true rhyme and one is really close to that. And then I said, this is a Dickinson, this is after Dickinson. So you let loose. And it really helped me open up those final two stanzas, which are, I think, where the poem probably takes off.
Mm.
Someone might say I should cut the first two stanzas. It's still subject to revision. So
Sure. Yeah.
yeah.
So, I mean, we think about what's that saying? Imitation is the, what do we say?
Sincerest form
The
of flattery.
thank you. Yeah.
Yes.
I kind of kept coming back to that idea of mimicry and trying to replicate and almost apprentice at something and what
Mhm.
that means to us in terms of the nature of how learning happens, what that means, what we're really trying to do beyond the flattery.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Do you have any thoughts about that?
I mean, obviously, I teach some creative writing. Most of my teaching is in literature, poetics, but on the literary side. But when I teach creative writing, and in the creative writing classes I have had the chance to take, mostly in college and then some workshops and various places since then, you stumble across people all the time giving prompts that is, write a poem like 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird, or write a poem, in the voice of this poet or that poet, sometimes drawing on a really distinctive sound, sometimes drawing on the way a poet might relate to form, as with Dickinson, for example. It's a tried and true kind of thing that I think one of the things it does is it pushes you out of your comfort zone. Like, we all, even though people talk a lot about finding their voice, we all have a voice. We may not be confident about it or secure in it as early writers, but it's innate. It's just in the same way that you have a speaking voice, you have a writing voice, and it can develop and it can change, and you can make choices about it. But a lot of times early on, we sit in what feels comfortable as writers. And as a prompt like, write in the style of, or in this this form that was developed by somebody, right after this poet. It forces you to explore and see that you have other ways that your voice can sound. Like, even as I feel like this poem is very, very apprenticed, you might say, to Dickinson, it's not, I think, what she would write. There are differences that I would probably have a hard time articulating, but I recognize myself in it. I'll just say it like that. And so I think that's a really useful thing for poets as in their early months, years of writing, and still interesting for me even all these years later. You don't feel like you're facing a blank screen when you have beloved or appreciated or admired or even slightly antagonistic voice that you are writing in response to. Like, I have my 13 Ways of Looking poem, and I don't love Stevens. I do not love Stevens.
All right.
But there's something about what he did in that poem in specific that is useful and portable, and it can be disread.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I so appreciate that you were willing to bring this fresh poem that you say is potentially unfinished. That is so generous to offer that up.
Oh, I think it's the tradition of experimental poets that I see myself in. Like, we always say, new stuff. Actually, it's a different word. It's not stuff, but you understand.
Yeah.
And to take every opportunity to push myself to put something new on the page. So it's a pleasure to have the prompt, in a sense. It's not the prompt you gave me, but the prompt I gave myself when I knew I was coming on this show. And I feel like it was really generative and productive for me, and hopefully something interesting for people to hear and listen to, think about.
That's amazing.
I really appreciate this.
Is there someone without whom you would not be writing? Which is just another way of saying who's at the top of your literary ancestor list. I know it's impossible to choose.
It's Brooks.
Okay.
No, it's Brooks.
Okay. Hey, I'm wrong. I love being wrong.
I mean, do I have many, many, many favorite poets? Absolutely. But like, Brooks is the person who I've had the longest relationship as a writer of poetry. I was a creative writing track of English major in college, and I spent my senior year, or the culminating class in that track, reading through Black's, it's not completely collected, but her biggest collection of poetry, and just thinking and writing in response to her. And I mean, other people I would name are like Harriet Mullen, Ed Roberson, and a lot of people I'm writing alongside right now. Far too many to name, but I have been blessed to be writing alongside some amazing poets. And I have no problem acknowledging the sort of cross currents as opposed to inheritances that inform my poems. So.
Oh, that's great. The cross currents. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Evie Shockley, it's been a pleasure to get to talk to you today. Any final thoughts?
I think it's really special to have this kind of podcast out there. And I'm just grateful for the invitation to be in conversation with you.
Oh, well, thank you. The pleasure is for sure mine. Thanks for being with us today for Melody or Witchcraft. You can find out more about today's guest by going to their Instagram at seminewblack. Please support us by commenting, liking, reposting, recommending. It makes a difference. Our theme music is by Emma Wallace. For complete show notes and photos, listen through the links at melodyorwitchcraft.com. You can also find us on Spotify, YouTube, Apple, and elsewhere.
Somebody high.